guess I could just start and say hello. My name is Chris Van Daalen. I'm with the Northwest Eco Building Guild, which is a free-state alliance of architects, builders, contractors, and product material suppliers who all share a common alarm about the climate crisis and working really hard to transform the built environment for long-term sustainability. We have a bonus today that you guys, it's not in the program and you didn't necessarily expect, but Amy Wheelis from the Northwest Energy Coalition, waving the hand and trying to fix our computer situation. She's here, she's the lobbyist who's been working on the Hill in Olympia for the last, 3 months, just day and night, trying to get all these bills passed, especially the ones that Beth Dolio just told us about. I know it's amazing stuff. So. We're going to cover a lot of ground today on green building policy. There's a lot going on and a lot of opportunities out there to try to make a difference with policy at multiple levels. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the state legislature, but also focus on the city level and the building code council. If we have any success with getting into slides. Wow. Let me try this. There we go. Probably should just reset, go back out. Okay, so. Just to start off, the Guild is one of the co-founders and a member of the Shift Zero Alliance, which is a statewide alliance of various green building and environmental organizations. So this presentation is on behalf of both the Guild and the Shift Zero Alliance. So if you go to the next slide. And we'll get started. There we go. So I don't have to remind all of you, but the reason that we're doing this is because our planet, while it's extremely resilient, is protected by only a thin layer of the atmosphere. It's amazing how this view really transformed the way that we see our planet, and we realized how small and fragile it really is. And we've been pumping unprecedented amounts of carbon into the atmosphere. The good news is that buildings, among many other strategies, are one of the leading contributors to this problem, and we actually have the technology now to transform our entire all the buildings to being net zero carbon within the next 25 years, hopefully even sooner than that. So we have a great opportunity, and the action is going to really start at the local level with cities taking the lead. Glad to see Rich Huey here, Director of Public Works from the City of Olympia. And it's really going to take cities driving this forward because that's where the key decisions are going to be made in terms of what kinds of buildings get built, what kinds of transportation systems are planned and designed and built, the infrastructure and everything. And as Mayor Michael Bloomberg said, the biggest possible dent will come from focusing on buildings. There's a lot of other things we have to do at the same time, but buildings are key. And then his successor, Bill de Blasio, made it so clear, and it's clear because we see the cities that are leading, that cities lead on climate and that they lead on buildings. So with that, I got a photo of Cheryl Selby speaking earlier, and I wanted to put her in this slide deck, but the next slide is from Mayor Seattle, Jenny Durkin, and we'll get her into the Shift Zero deck next time. And the cities in Washington are definitely on board with this, leading with climate, leading on buildings. And as you can see, our Seattle mayor, our Olympia mayor, our Lacey City Council's here in force today. So good things happening at the local level. Next. And as you know, we're seeing unprecedented amount of carbon going into the atmosphere and unprecedented changes, so we need unprecedented solutions. Passivhaus is a strategy that actually it's been mostly developed out of the residential sector, but now it's being applied at scale and has the potential to be scaled up really quickly specifically because We've shown the data of many passive house buildings, whether they're single family or up to the large scale of multifamily and high rise. These passive house buildings are showing unprecedented building performance of 75 to 95% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, and they're doing it almost at cost parity with traditional buildings. So if you could, the state of Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency added an incentive to their low-income housing tax credit program and got 179 project proposals. Out of those proposals, they found that the projects that incorporated the passive house standard into the design of the building were on average 1.8% more upfront costs than all the other buildings that were in that data set. So 2% there. The Pembina Institute did a sampling of built projects around the Northwest and found a 6% premium on first costs. And then Rushing did a study recently on the City of Shoreline's new Deep Green Incentive Program that showed a 2.8 to 4.9%. Another company that is showing this is Walsh Construction. They've been able to, they did a series of large multifamily affordable housing projects and found that each of the first one was about 11% more. They learned so much on that project. The next one, they found about 5% of a cost premium. And the next one, they are pretty much getting it down to zero cost premium for passive house. And then the next slide, 85 to 95% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. Mm-hmm. So there's absolutely no reason we should not be doing this everywhere right now. It's just like we heard this morning, it's the political will, it's the technology, the adoption of this technology has been being resisted by some parts of our sector, of our industry. Sir?
But our latitude would make the passive house less effective, isn't it?
No, I mean, you have to adapt it to your specific, it's not all about passive solar. We're not talking just about passive solar design. We're talking about passive building strategies, which include thicker insulation in the walls, triple pane windows, super air sealing on everything. So it's a super tight, super insulated building, and then it uses heat recovery ventilation to capture the heat before the fresh air is brought in, so you're not losing the heat through your ventilation system. So those things in combination create a building that it uses 70 to 90% less energy, and gets it to the place where just a little bit of renewable energies gets you past net zero energy. If you go to the next slide, it kind of talks about this. So we've heard about net zero energy for a while, basically a building that produces all of the energy that it needs on site to offset the energy use of that building. That's what we call net zero energy. But zero net carbon is taking that idea another step, because you could have a hugely inefficient building, and if you had a giant roof space, you could put enough solar on that building to offset the energy use. It's going to require tons and tons of energy to run it, but you could offset it all with solar. Now that's maybe net zero energy, but it's not really getting us what we want. So first and foremost, the first priority of net zero carbon is achieve maximum energy efficiency to reduce the load of the building as low as possible before you start looking at renewables. And the next step is provide enough on-site renewables to provide to get you to zero net energy or beyond. And only if it's not practical to do on-site renewables, then we'll get off-site utility scale renewable energy offsets. And so if you put these in this order and prioritize that energy efficiency first, then you get a zero net carbon building. You've actually reduced the loads and reduced the carbon emissions from the very beginning. So that's what we say. That's what we're talking about when we talk zero net carbon. Yes. So there's a lot of different organizations in the field of green building that are pushing for the Living Building Challenge or the Passive House certification or Built Green. There's so many different organizations, and a couple of years ago we realized that we are sort of competing with each other, even though we're all on the same team. And so instead of having so many different organizations out there, we decided to join forces and bring ourselves under a common umbrella, and that is the Shift Zero Alliance. So I'm going to take a moment to tell you a little bit about that. Because together we have found that we have common ground around our alarm for climate change. By bringing it together, we have a collective voice and we have a greater impact. So this comes directly out of the Shift Zero mission statement, and it's otherwise known as the Zero Net Carbon Building Alliance. Shift Zero starts from common ground, which is our alarm about the climate crisis, to work for common cause, a zero net carbon environment for all members of our community. And recognizing the urgency to decarbonize our buildings, we focus on impacts that are ambitious, scalable, and quantifiable. Now, one of the key components of this statement of purpose is the zero net carbon environment for all members of our community. A green building has been kind of perceived as a lot more expensive, and therefore it's only accessible to people who have a lot of resources. And the fact is, as we've just shown with those data, that we have the ability to deliver this to everyone, everywhere right now. And there's no excuse for not doing that. And there's so many historic inequities in the way that buildings, it's built into the zoning and planning policies. It's also built into the economics of housing, that people who have less resources live in homes that are poorly insulated, that have bad ventilation, that have interior moisture and mold issues. It's just sort of, they kind of go together, and we need to separate that and make these benefits of healthy, more comfortable, energy efficient homes at zero energy bill available to everyone. So these are all the organizations so far that are part of the Shift Zero Alliance. There's 29 of us, I think, at this point. I'm not sure what the latest count is, but it's an impressive mix of climate change advocacy groups, green building organizations, businesses that are involved in the building industry, and affordable housing organizations who we really tried to join forces with closely on this whole effort because of that commitment to try to have a more equitable approach to this built environment.
Is this list on the Shift Zero website?
Yes, it is. If you want to check it out, it's just shiftzero.org. Yeah. So we've done a lot of work in the last 2 years. It was June 2017 that the same day that Trump pulled us out of the Paris Accord, or announced that, we formed this new alliance. And since then, we produced a Zero Net Carbon Policy Toolkit, which we're going to talk about.
Are you handing those out?
I only have a few copies, but I can pass them around. Why don't I just start them around? You can take a look while we're talking. But it's all available at shiftzero.org. You can download at your own. Anyway, so we advocated with the city of Tacoma, and they're going to hire a green building specialist in the planning department. We've been working on a variety of fronts. I'm not going to read all of these, especially this one. It's really hard. All these stupid acronyms.
Yes.
But it's really actually very important for the low-income housing and trying to get that priorities listed there for low carbon, zero carbon buildings. So. This is a good one. We have Court Olson in the room. Oh, you were going to try to hide. I'm sorry. Court helped us identify a legal pathway for PACE financing for green building, which we'll talk a little bit more later, but it's a major breakthrough. So a lot of action already, and the future is really bright for this. And as you heard Beth talking about, we're getting some amazing bills passed. So moving on. I want to talk a little bit about the different initiatives that Shift Zero has. We have 6 different initiatives that we prioritize from the get-go. And I'm going to start off with the 20 by 2020 building challenge, because I want to elaborate a little bit more on what we mean by net zero buildings. It's not specifically a policy tool, but it is an incentive. We'll talk more in the toolkit discussion about marketing incentives. Helping builders create more higher profile demonstration projects. So the 20 by 20 challenge is a project with Shift Zero, King County Green Tools, and the Passivhaus Northwest organization to get 20 Passivhaus buildings of 20,000 square feet or larger underway, under construction, permitted by the year 2020 that are zero net carbon buildings. And so far, we have 5 projects pledged. These are mostly multifamily projects, obviously 20,000 square foot or larger, except for the Built Green residential group, where they're actually combining a bunch of different single-family and small multifamily residences to have a combined pledge of a 20,000 square foot of construction. So that's a group of smaller buildings. So those are the 5. But what I noticed is that there's none there from Thurston County. We need to change that.
How about Jefferson County?
those are all in King County. It really is intended, or it was designed to be a King County specific project, but I'm advocating within Shift Zero and with all of you that we need to be getting these kind of demonstration projects on the ground here in Thurston County and in Pierce County to join the collective effort. So another, I've been talking about the affordable housing aspect, and the Housing Development Consortium, also a Seattle-based organization, has this Exemplary Buildings affinity group, which is queuing off of a Exemplary Buildings program that the state of Brussels, Belgium developed early in 2015, and they now have a building code that requires passive house level construction for all new construction, and also provides highly energy efficient retrofits for all existing buildings. So they were able to do it by demonstrating high profile projects that showed that they can achieve cost parity and that it creates jobs and it's not an undue burden for the building industry. They did that over about 7 years of having exemplary building pilot projects. And so we're trying to emulate that idea in Seattle by working with the Housing Development Consortium and so they've adopted this idea of zero net carbon exemplary buildings for as many of their affordable housing projects as possible. Next page. This just talks a little bit about what that means. Really, it's about reducing the loads in the building, right? So this is your code minimum building. So plug loads are a big part of it, and they're hard to reduce, but space heating and domestic hot water are the biggest pieces. And you can get these down to really, really low. And so this kind of just gives you a sense of what we're going after when we're talking about the zero net carbon building. And the path to exemplary buildings, the idea here is that if we can demonstrate some high profile projects that really exemplify the cost effectiveness, the health improvements, the zero net carbon aspect of this, and we can start to scale that up, eventually it will help to flip the market. And because builders who are not doing that will see that they're losing money, that they're losing market share to these high-profile projects. So our ultimate goal is to have an exemplary standard for all buildings, and that's what zero net carbon and the Shift Zero Alliance is all about. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to some of our policy initiatives. The Shift Zero Policy Toolkit is going around. We did this as a collaboration between some of the green building advocates into Seattle, Shoreline, and other places around the region that have actually implemented successful city-level policies for zero net carbon buildings. And so we pull all that information together and we put it into an easy-to-use toolkit for cities to follow, for city staff to look at, for the city councils to take up and consider how to adapt those ideas to a local situation. Because each city is very different, and so it's not going to be a cut and paste sort of deal with the incentives, but there are some themes and ideas that can be adapted pretty easily to other locations. So before I dive into the details of the toolkit, I want to mention why we know this is going to work, because it's basically all about green building incentives, and we know that zero net carbon building incentives work. Because in Seattle, 75% of residential new construction is now certified Built Green 4-star or higher. And do you think everybody in Seattle just decided that they wanted to, address climate change and make healthier buildings? No, they did it because it made economic sense. The city of Seattle adopted a policy that said, if you want to get expedited permitting, which will cut about 6 weeks off of your permitting time, you have to register to certify your building under Built Green at 4-star or higher. And everybody started doing it. They are transforming the market. So they also use land use incentives like adding floor area ratio allowance, height density and height bonuses. And by providing those incentives, they were able to drive 75% of the market in new construction into Built Green certification.
Does Built Green also cover retrofits?
They do have a retrofit checklist. It's not a big part of their program. We definitely need to talk about how to address retrofits. And I think it's more of a how do we get the funding to pay for it. I mean, we can require it to a certain extent, but that's going to be unpopular for sure. So, how much Built Green certification is going on in Olympia and Tacoma, we're pretty much around 0 at this point. However, the good news is that Bill Green of Kingston Homebush County that has driven this program and built that partnership with the city of Seattle, they are now offering to come to basically any part of the state and do the certification services, which allows our local Olympia master builders to not have to necessarily get back into the business of doing the certifications. They can, if they're willing to just help us promote the program, then the hard part of actually doing the certifications will be provided by the Bill Green program out of King County. And so, and they're offering that to pretty much anywhere around the state, but they want to enter into agreements with the local master builders associations in order to, divide up the responsibility and assure everybody, make sure everybody's comfortable with the arrangement. So we've already met with Olympia Master Builders and Pierce MBA, and they're both willing, and they're in this conversation with Bill Green. They're working out their agreements now. So in the very near future, we can see Bill Green certification happening again here in Thurston County. But before we even do that, we can begin to work with our local jurisdictions to adopt policies that provide expedited permitting or land use bonuses to projects that pursue Bill Green certification. So if we can get those two things to work together, we can really accelerate adoption. Couple
So
questions?
does the certification go before the building is built? Do they look over the plans and certify then, or is it after everything's been built?
It's after, but it starts before. So they when they decide they're going to build, they declare, we're going to register this to get certified. And then there's a couple of different checkpoints along the way. We do look at the plans, but then there's a Bill Green verifier. And so that's one of the things, one of the jobs that would be created in Thurston County if we get this going like this, is we would have more verifiers going around to run through the checklist, and do lower door tests on the completed buildings and verify all the different elements that the builder said, we're going to do these green building things, and then they go through and verify all that third-party verification. So, in Seattle, they've actually gone back post-occupancy and found that the projected model performance of those homes was about, I think it was about 30%, 35 to 40% above code performance. And what they're finding is that they've actually achieved more like 50% above code performance. So it's the Bill Green certification is proving to be very predictive the way that they do their modeling, which isn't always the case. LEED has had some problems because their buildings were said to be a certain amount of efficiency, but then when they actually went back and tested some of those, they weren't performing at that level. So, another question there?
Yes, I understand about the land use incentives.
Mm-hmm.
How can, I'm not sure how to phrase this, but how can Built Green allow green to still be on site? I'm talking about trees.
Mm-hmm. It's part of their certification. They have a site development checklist, which has options in there for preserving on-site trees, for doing low impact development, green infrastructure.
So I'd be really interested to find out more about that.
Yeah, just check out, you can check it out on the web at builtgreen.net.
And what would I look for?
The checklist, the Built Green checklist, yeah.
Okay,
And then you can explore the whole certification tool.
okay,
at that
all right, good, thank you.
point.
So what exactly is driving the energy savings? Is it more insulation? Is it the triple pane glass? What is driving?
That's a great question, which we're going to talk about at the next session. There's a panel of green building specialists who are going to be talking about what are those elements of green buildings. Stick with us and find out. So as I mentioned at the beginning, this is based on some exemplary programs in Seattle. I already talked about the expedited permitting. We also have this Living Building Challenge pilot program that's providing all kinds of land use incentives, as well as dedicated staff to help work through permitting challenges and also code departures for projects that are pursuing the Living Building Challenge. Does anybody know or not know, anybody not know what the Living Building Challenge is? Okay, so I'll briefly say it is the most rigorous green building standard in the world. It doesn't require your building to be less bad on the environment. It requires it to be good, to actually be positive, to go beyond negative impacts to actually be positive impacts. So ecological restoration in the surrounding landscape is part of the Living Building Challenge. Beauty and inspiration are part of the Living Building Challenge, as well as net positive energy, net positive water, which means you're not only producing as much, but actually producing more than the site needs. So that's the living building challenge in a very short nutshell.
Is that what the bullet building is?
The bullet foundation building is one of the examples of that. Okay, so the Shift Zero Net Policy Carbon Toolkit is organized by the tiers of certification with the, like Built Green 5-star, which is the top level of Built Green, being in the highly efficient tier, which gets a certain amount of incentives, and then the next tier up is really the zero net carbon tier, which is where you're doing a certification that requires net zero energy, requires the combination of maximizing energy efficiency with adding on-site renewables. And then there's a deep green third tier, which is like the Living Building Challenge, which goes beyond just the energy components to everything else. So we've taken the best of the other cities' work and we sort of boiled it down into what we felt would actually achieve zero net carbon. And that's where the toolkit is organized by tiers that lead to these higher levels. And it provides guidance on what incentives can be applied in a given local context. It also provides draft model legislation that the city can then adapt to their own ordinance and adopt locally, as well as a lot of different additional resources.
What base are you working with as far as net zero? Are you working with like where the building components are coming from, or just as a building that is producing net zero?
So what we're talking about with zero net carbon primarily is the building operational energy, not so much the embodied energy of the building materials. Now we are beginning to try to tackle that because as the amount of embodied operational energy comes down, that embodied energy becomes a much bigger part of the whole energy footprint of a building. So we're looking at that. I mean, it's really it's a very challenging topic to try to wrap your head around. We have a small plant supply. Karen, you want to raise your hand? They provide a bunch of materials, not only for passive house construction, but also these materials are actually natural materials that sequester carbon in the building. So that's not only a low carbon, but a carbon negative building material. So we're starting to talk about, we know how to do it, we just don't know how to measure it exactly and talk about it in policy. So we're working on those parts. So keep tuned for that. Next. Okay, and so I already mentioned a few of these incentive types, expedited permitting for certified projects, the land use incentives. Another key way that the city can incentivize green building is providing technical assistance in the planning department, at the permit desk, where if you have someone there who knows what to do, knows what they're talking about, they can actually advise and encourage a builder to incorporate some of these incentives. Financial incentives, of course, direct financial grants or waivers of permitting fees or usage fees are ways to subsidize zero net carbon building, and then marketing assistance, such as getting the county or the city to support something like the 20 by 2020 challenge that raises the profile of some of these exemplary buildings. Yes.
Do you remember Community Power Works? It was about 7 or 8 years ago.
Yes, they did a
And was
lot.
that through the utility? I think it was City Light that told us about it. I did it at my
Yes.
house. You got a rebate or a discount on
On the
energy
auditing.
auditing.
Yep, you got your energy audit paid for or partially paid
Right,
for.
partially paid for, and you got discounts on all the retrofitting.
I do remember
And
that.
what happened to it and why,
Well,
how
it
did you
was-
get it to be more widespread?
It was going really strong under the ARA funding, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, the stimulus package under the Obama administration. And so when that funding was federal grants that drove, we had it here in Thurston County, it was Thurston Energy that was doing the very same work. And so when that funding dried up, we ended up having to kind of scale it back. It still happens on a private basis, but we're actually talking with TCAT about trying to see if we can bring Thurston Energy back to life because we need to retrofit these buildings.
So what could we do in other counties? Who would we talk to?
It would probably be your Economic Development Council here in Thurston County, or the best place to talk to would probably be the Washington State University Cooperative Extension Energy Program. Next. So we want to get involved with this locally. You could talk to Rich there, twist his arm a bit. You could work with the Tacoma Green Building Specialist if you live in that area. We want to encourage the Planning Commission and the City Council to adopt incentives or requirements for the affordable housing RFPs that are going to be coming out soon to actually require those to be net zero energy so that they're not only low cost to rent, but they're also low cost, they're zero energy bill. So a lot of people say, well, it's gonna cost more to do this, it's gonna drive the cost of building up, but actually zero energy bill is a huge piece of affordability, and we can do that now. So I'm gonna just go ahead and get on to the next section and introduce my colleague here, Amy Wheelis from the Northwest Energy Coalition. She's our lobbyist. Oh no, dirty words. But it's nice to have one, isn't it?
Okay.
No, we're being filmed. We don't wanna.
Oh, okay.
I'll flip the flicker.
Great. Hi, my name's Amy Wheelis. I'm with the Northwest Energy Coalition, and we are a public interest nonprofit. We're based in Seattle, but we work in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Montana. And traditionally, we've focused on electricity policy, but we are very supportive of energy efficiency policy because it is our cheapest resource. So it's rather than go build a wind farm or a natural gas plant to just save energy, that is the best thing that we can do. So we've been working with Ship Zero for the past few years, on kind of brainstorming different ideas for policy that we think will be impactful for the state of Washington. And so we worked through the summer and fall on some ideas, and we talked with legislators and with the governor's office and with different state agencies. And I missed most of Beth's presentation this morning, but as she mentioned, it's an exciting session. So we'll go to the next slide.
Yeah, people are.
So just to give you an overview in case you're not steeped in legislation stuff, our session started January 14th and it runs until the end of April. And we're on a long session, so a capital budget and operating budget for the state that should be passed this year. And so in past years, we have not necessarily ended on time. There have been special sessions while they work through budget issues, and that is a very real possibility this year. But most policy matters will be decided just in the next few days, really.
Oops, sorry.
That's okay. And I would just say the next, there's a lot of hurdles to get through, and the next one is Wednesday. So basically, any policy that doesn't have an impact, well, that is not classified as necessary to implement the budget needs to be passed out of its opposite chamber by Wednesday, close of business. So that was frustrating. So in December, Governor Inslee announced kind of a sector-by-sector approach of policies to address climate change. In the past, he's been pursuing carbon pricing initiatives, but this year he decided, let's try a sector-by-sector approach. 100% clean electricity, which we've been following, it's making good headway. A policy on clean buildings, a policy on superpollutants, hydrofluorocarbons, policies around clean fuels, and electric vehicles. So I'm just going to go through a few bills that are most impactful on the building sector, building policy. But if you have questions on other stuff afterwards, we have some time to discuss some of the other bills. So HB 1112, hydrofluorocarbons. This would phase out hydrofluorocarbons and other ozone depleting substances through a variety of rules, procurement policies, and building codes. And this is basically modeled on some federal legislation that was in the works until the Trump administration came here and stopped it. So now the states are trying to lead on this, and I believe a few other states have been active in this. And this bill,
What does it have to do with rabbits?
I didn't tell you. Because you got me to come to look on a Saturday, I'm gonna put some more entertainment in my life. So just is a description of where it is in the process. This bill is running along. It made it through one chamber and it's gone through all the committees in the other chamber and now is available for the Senate to vote on the floor. And so hopefully they will do that before winter. Another bill, HD 1444. This is related to appliance efficiency. So appliances, you might think of your clothes washers or your dishwashers. A number of products have standards at the federal level that set how much energy they can use, but there are a number of products that don't have any sort of federal standards. And so for those products, states can set their own standards. So this bill establishes water and energy standards for a number of common products. And for the most part, it's adapting things that California has done or Vermont or Colorado. So any new shower head that's sold in the state will have to be as water efficient as the bill sets out. It also covers things like computers, air compressors, commercial dishwashers, a variety of other things. And it will have a pretty significant set of savings over the next 15 years in terms of water saved, electricity saved, natural gas saved, which really has a big impact on your utility bill. And then the next interesting thing is it requires new electric storage water heaters to be grid ready. And that just means that if you buy a new electric storage water heater and install it in your home, it'll have a little device on there that at some point in the future your utility could come in and use it as a demand response resource. And if you want to talk more about that, I'm happy to. But
The next session, we'll be talking about
great.
demand response.
So this bill is also running along. This is a bill that was in a form, it was available to the legislature last year and we modified it a little bit and it's running along. I think it's got a good chance this year.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Why do you think fossil gas will be used in 15 years?
I don't necessarily.
Nowhere. No.
Yeah. Well, that said that the 100% clean energy bill passed and is now on its way to the governor's desk. So.
Well, that is for electricity production.
Yeah.
But for right now we use gas for water heating and space heating in the direct form. And I think California's got stoves. And stoves, yes, exactly, and some dryers. So the California Building Decarbonization Coalition has an interesting roadmap for how do we get fossil gas out of homes and businesses. And I'm not going to go through it here, but it's a very good overview of all the the technological aspects and then the marketing and communication aspects.
The next thing we should be working on for sure.
So you're not working on it yet?
We're exploring it. Yeah. We're talking internally with the group about, how do we address, get fossil fuels and build that, keep that coalition going and keep it together.
So HB 1257, Clean Buildings for Washington Act, this is one of the pieces of that chart earlier from the Governor Inslee. And this is sort of an omnibus collection of policies within one bill. It creates a nation-leading building performance standard for large commercial buildings, and an incentive program to accelerate achievement. So that just means very large buildings in the state would be held to a standard of energy use, and if you're above that standard, you're going to have to make some retrofits to achieve the standard. But recognizing that some buildings are going to be way beyond that standard, there's about $75 million in incentives to help them achieve those or make those capital improvements that they might need to make. The policy also directs gas utilities to do more conservation, some more energy efficiency programs, and allows for more renewable natural gas procurement and programming. And I think something interesting in this bullet is it will direct the gas utilities to start incorporating a social cost of carbon in their energy efficiency planning, which they do not do.
What is renewable natural gas?
This is basically a kind of substitute for the gas that is used for your stoves or your heating, but made from organic matter, whether it's methane.
Also like biofuel of some sort.
Yeah, have you heard of biogas, where you put like your food waste into a biodigester?
Okay.
And your food waste is put in with like water and the microbiomes will digest it and it's create gas and you can cook it.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
I didn't know where we would get renewable gas, but now I do.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept. It's my personal take. I am not sure that we will ever have enough renewable natural gas to replace the gas that is currently used. So we're going to do
Reduce and then,
yes.
Right.
Also comes off landfills.
Yes. A lot of lines, for example, has a methane gas digester that they heat the building with and the building next door.
Who does?
A lot of lines, the wastewater treatment plant downtown. Rich could tell you all about it, I'm sure.
The Hands-on Children's Museum is heated with that gas.
Yeah, it's a little district.
And dairies do it.
Yeah, farmers are learning to do that with
Yep.
cows, they try to poop here and go down underground use the biodigester there.
Yeah, that's a cool idea. So, in the future, the bill directs the gas utilities to start, allowing you, the customer, to purchase more renewable natural gas. If you have a gas water heater, you can say, I want to pay a little bit more, similar to how Puget Sound Energy and Seattle City Light do a green tariff. The bill also creates an EV readiness requirement for new buildings. So if you are a new building with parking, it just says you need to plan for more electric vehicle charging in the future, which totally makes sense to me. And then originally the bill had a residential stretch code provision, which would have said, right now our energy code in the state for new residential buildings is the same and no jurisdiction can modify it. So this would have said, okay, state, develop the energy code, but then also develop 2 additional tiers, so that if the city of Olympia wants to make sure that all new construction is more efficient,
Which they do.
they could adopt one of those tiers.
Seattle has an increased energy efficiency over the base.
Commercial.
On the commercial side, yes.
It's
Yeah.
residential, yeah.
So on the commercial side, jurisdictions can do whatever they want, and only Seattle has modified it. So there was sort of trying to do a similar thing on the residential side without, Lacey changing one little thing here and Olympia changing one little thing here. I have some standardization for how to do it. We got a lot of pushback from the building industry.
They said it would create a different code in every town, which is exactly what she just explained, it would not do. But that was their argument, or one of their arguments.
So-
Which made me mad.
So I think there's something there for next session. We're gonna brainstorm a little bit after the session is over. All right, what bunny do I have today? So this is the Energizer Bunny. This bill keeps going and going. It has made it all the way through all the steps it needs to by this point, except it needs to pass out of the Senate. So this is just a matter of getting it out of the Senate, and then it would need to be concurred with what came out of the House, and then we're done. Probably easy, right?
It's a big step, and it only, if I can just add,
Yeah.
it only kind of solves some of the issues. I mean, as you can see, it doesn't address anything with residential construction, and it's only these really large buildings, but it's a start, and I think we'll just keep coming back next year and the year after. I know as long as we have a governor, President Inslee, we'll be able to continue to push this forward, so.
Yeah, and I have to say the nation leading, or the nation leading is right here on that first bullet. A building energy performance standard is,
First in the nation.
it would be the first state in the nation to do something like that, where large commercial buildings need to do something. The Washington DC had passed a similar ordinance last November that hasn't been implemented yet, so we're all still learning from each other on the best way to do that. Commercial PACER. So if you've ever heard of PACE, Properties as Clean Energy.
I bet some people have it, yeah.
This is a way to finance energy improvements or water improvements or seismic improvements on your property tax bill. And this is a kind of a low-cost, long-term financing mechanism, and the debt stays with the property rather than the property owner. So a lot of, especially commercial buildings like this, because they often have pretty frequent turnover, so they're reluctant to make really significant upgrades if they think they're going to have to be on the hook for paying it back quickly. This is a mechanism that's available in many other states, and Washington has not had it. And there have been some constitutional concerns, and we, as Chris mentioned, worked court with some legal assistance, with some legal assistance. We found a path for how this could work in Washington. And we got a lot of interest from building owners, from the emergency managers, because there's a lot of unreinforced masonry, for example, in the state. So this would be a way to help address that. And there could be some significant energy improvements that could be made with this sort of mechanism. So, this bill did not make it through the cutoffs to get out of the House in time, but it's we're in a biennium session, so this bill is available to be worked on next session. So we're gonna work with the sponsor, that's all, and some other stakeholders to make sure we can get it across the finish line. And then budget priorities. As I mentioned, this is a capital budget and operating budget year, so there's a lot of things in the budget that are of interest to people who work on energy efficiency. So I'll just click through them. There's $10 million. The governor requested in his budget $10 million for ultra high efficiency affordable housing. So this is money that could, if you're an affordable housing development and you want to go build a project that's near net zero, you could take from this fund. The last budget had about $2.5 million and it funded, I believe, 150 units of near net zero housing. So the hope is that we can quadruple that. That would be great. And those projects were in Everett and Spokane, and there's a lot of interest as developers have gotten more experience. They want to keep trying new techniques. $25 million was in the governor's budget for weatherization funding. So this is going into low-income households and helping them fully weatherize. And there's also a component here of health. So if they have carpets that have mold, this funding could be used to take out the carpets, for example. Funding for public building retrofits and how do we make sure that our public buildings are on a path for good performance in the future. And then a lot of the energy priorities just writ large put a lot of work on the Department of Commerce and also some of our other state agencies. And so we just need to make sure that they're being funded to do that work. So the House came up with their budget, the Senate came up with their budget, and and they need to be done by April 28th with a budget for the year. And if they don't, then there will probably be a special session to keep working on issues.
So I think it was Denmark or someone that was like burning trash, and I think they had like a, like a steam turbine and burning trash with steam and making electricity that way. How come there isn't any incentive to try to, make energy that way to help the landfills?
I believe Spokane area has a trash incinerator. I don't know that it is necessarily the cleanest trash incinerator in the world. So I think I think there is, especially in our, as we're struggling to deal with recycling issues, I've heard from some legislators, they're like, oh, why don't we just do it like, there's some other, like Switzerland does trash burning.
Or maybe it was, anyway, yeah.
Denmark too.
Oh, Denmark.
Yeah, I mean, a number of other places will, instead of
Like I understand
where to
it's
take
not clean energy, but I
Yeah.
do think it's gonna help with the landfill.
Oh, it is clean there. They've made it clean, I think.
Yeah, so I think there's some
There's a lot of
interest,
scrubbing there.
but
Getting pollutants out.
not something I know a ton about.
Right, I think it would be better than what's going on with just the landfill.
Or even like shipping or recycling to China, like, the net emissions of that versus, burning it on site for electricity.
Right, yeah. Okay, anyway, food for thought, I guess.
It's time to wrap.
Okay, great. So as Beth mentioned in the session this morning, this is just the last few days are going to be the push on a lot of bills. The Senate is in session today, for example, working through a few bills off the floor. And I think I mentioned there are 2,500 bills that were introduced in the legislature this year, which is an incredible amount. And only in an average session, 400 to 600 bills will pass and make it all the way through. And so it is advocacy that pushes more things along. They don't just magically get there. So I just gave a few easy examples of what you can do to contact your legislator about bills of interest, bills I mentioned here, bills that Rep. Dolio talked about this morning. You can email your legislator directly. Super easy. People sometimes feel a little intimidated by that, but I think a 1-2-liner thing is really impactful. And then even if your legislator is super on board, like Rep. Dolio is, then she can turn around and I'm hearing from my constituents these things, so that really helps. I tweet, so here's a suggestion for how you can tweet the #WarLeg. You can talk about your interests to other groups who are active in the legislature, like Sierra Club, Washington Environmental Council, to just let them know what you're interested in, and they can help you plug in the right way. Writing a letter to editor or an op-ed in your local paper is always super useful, and if you are interested in that, I can connect you with folks that give you templates and guidelines for how to do that, so it's not so intimidating. And then you can meet with your legislator, especially outside of session, and just talk about your interests. During session, it's a lot harder to get a hold of them, but outside of session, you can sit down and just talk about all the things that are important to you.
So a couple of things I want to, before we take up questions, they actually have a sign-up sheet at the front of the room and they wanted everyone to sign in. You probably only have to do it with your email once, but I'm gonna pass this around, and there's another one in the back.
But those are for the other sessions.
Oh, for the other sessions, okay. So when we break, we'll put this on the back table. Whoever has it could take it to the back table so other people can get it on the way out. I'm sorry I didn't bring this up earlier, so hopefully you can grab it. So there's a whole other section in our slide deck here about building codes and the residential energy code cycle that is just getting underway now that we can all really get engaged with and influence the building codes. The other thing I wanted to mention, we're not gonna have time to talk about it obviously, so the other thing I wanted to mention before we let you go is that in the Clean Buildings Act and the budget priorities that Amy just described, there's a provision that directs the Department of Commerce to develop a roadmap to a 2030 net zero energy code, and which is one of the task force initiatives of the Shift Zero Alliance is to push toward that. And so, after this immediate cycle, which is the residential and commercial code, as soon as that's done next fall, we're going to be really buckling down to figure out how do we get the state to really get on a path to meet or exceed the goal of net zero energy by 2030 within the building code requirements. So
And
look
I'm
forward.
sorry to say the session time is over.
So there's that. We're not going to talk about it, but if you have, I know there was probably a couple of questions. I saw some hands, but just come up and chat with us now if you can. Answer those.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.